India, 326 BCE. At the edge of the known world, the unthinkable is about to happen. The most successful military commander in history, undefeated in a decade of warfare, is about to face his first defeat, not from enemies, but from his own men. As Alexander the Great stands before his army at the Hyphasis River, demanding they march further into India, 30,000 battle-hardened veterans who would die for him choose instead to defy him. But to understand how the world's greatest conqueror reached this breaking point, we need to return to the forces that created him and would ultimately destroy him. When we hear the name Alexander the Great, we think of history's most successful conqueror, the man who built an empire stretching from Greece to India before his 33rd birthday. We remember the undefeated general who revolutionized warfare, the visionary who founded cities that still stand today, the legend who inspired leaders from Julius Caesar to Cleopatra, Napoleon to Patton. But behind these legendary achievements lies a more human story. To understand Alexander, we must return to Pella, Macedonia, 340 BCE, where a teenage prince lives in the shadow of greatness. His father, Philip II, has transformed Macedonia from a poor kingdom into the most powerful force Greece has ever seen. Young Alexander watches as his father drills what would become history's most fearsome army, knowing he's expected to achieve even more. "You must find a kingdom worthy of yourself," Philip tells his son. "Macedonia is too small for you." These words would echo through Alexander's life, a father's challenge that set an impossible standard. To be worthy of the throne, Alexander would need to conquer a kingdom greater than any the world had ever seen. But greatness wasn't the only burden placed on young Alexander's shoulders. In the palace's dark corridors, his mother Olympias performs mysterious rituals with sacred snakes. She whispers a dangerous secret to her son, that Philip isn't his true father, but that he was conceived by Zeus himself. The court whispers that Olympias is mad, but her words take root in Alexander's mind, planting seeds of divine destiny that would later bloom into dangerous conviction. Between his father's military expectations and his mother's tales of divinity, Alexander finds refuge in education. For 3 crucial years, he studies under the philosopher Aristotle in the peaceful sanctuary of Mieza. Here, away from court politics and family pressures, the young prince's natural curiosity flourishes. Aristotle opens his mind to a world bigger than conquest, teaching him about the behavior of animals, the governance of cities, and the cultures that exist beyond Greece. But it was in the pages of Homer's Iliad that Alexander found his true inspiration. He slept with a copy under his pillow, memorizing tales of heroes who achieved immortal glory. In Achilles, he found a model for his own destiny, a warrior whose name would echo through eternity. These stories, combined with Aristotle's teachings and his mother's whispers of divinity, shaped Alexander's view of himself. A prince destined not just to rule, but to become legend. When assassins strike down Philip, the 20-year-old Alexander faces his first true challenge. Some whisper he was involved, guided by his mother's ambitions. But Alexander moves too quickly for questions, securing the throne and surpassing his father's dreams of invading Persia. In his first campaigns, Alexander proves he is more than just his father's son. At the Battle of the Granicus River, he leads the cavalry charge himself, nearly dying when his helmet is split open by a Persian axe. His men watch in awe as their young king, blood streaming down his face, continues fighting. But it's not just his courage that wins their loyalty. In the scorching desert campaign, when a soldier brings him water during a drought, Alexander does something extraordinary. Looking at his thirsty men, he pours the water into the sand. "If my men can't drink," he declares, "neither will I." This is Alexander at his finest, a king who shares every hardship with his soldiers. His treatment of conquered peoples reveals a leader wise beyond his years. After defeating Darius III's family, he treats the Persian royal family with respect, unheard of in an age of brutal conquest. In Egypt, he respects local customs and visits native temples. The young student of Aristotle puts his learning to use, showing curiosity about different cultures rather than dismissing them as barbarian. Yet, with each victory, something subtle begins to shift. At Persepolis, the great capital of Persia, we see the first cracks in Alexander's character. He allows his army to loot the city, then burns the great palace to the ground. The student who once valued knowledge now destroys one of the ancient world's greatest treasures. After 8 years of constant victory, Alexander turns his armies toward India. Through monsoon rains and scorching heat, his men follow him. They scale impossible cliffs, fight unfamiliar enemies with war elephants, and push deeper into the unknown. Alexander seems unstoppable. Then, at the Hyphasis River, something unprecedented happens. His army, the most loyal fighting force in history, refuses to go further. For 3 days, Alexander stays in his tent, refusing to see anyone. When he finally emerges, he doesn't face an army of loyal soldiers, but a wall of silence. For the first time in his life, Alexander faces something he cannot defeat: the limits of human endurance. This rejection shatters Alexander's sense of destiny. The man who believed himself divine now faces a very human reality. The transformation is swift and terrifying. The king who once poured water into sand, rather than drink alone, now spends his nights drinking heavily in isolation, haunted by this first taste of failure. Paranoia and rage replace wisdom and mercy. When his old friend Cletus, who once saved his life in battle, suggests that Philip deserves some credit for Alexander's victories, Alexander plunges a spear through his heart in a drunken rage. The next morning, he weeps over Cletus's body, but the pattern is set. Any challenge to his divine image becomes a death sentence. The executions multiply. He orders the death of Parmenion, his most experienced general, on the mere suspicion of disloyalty. When Callisthenes, a historian and nephew of Aristotle, refuses to prostrate himself before Alexander as a god, he's arrested and tortured to death. The transformation is complete. The man who once inspired loyalty through his actions now demands it through fear. But it's the death of Hephaestion, his closest friend and most trusted companion, that finally pushes Alexander into madness. When fever claims Hephaestion, Alexander's grief knows no bounds. He crucifies the physician who failed to save him, orders an entire city to shave their heads in mourning, and plans funeral monuments that would bankrupt kingdoms. The young king, who once showed such restraint, now drowns his sorrow in increasingly grandiose displays of power. In Babylon, 323 BCE, that same fever that took Hephaestion now burns through Alexander. The greatest conqueror in history lies dying at just 32. His generals crowd around, asking who should inherit his empire. "To the strongest," he whispers. With these final words, Alexander seals his empire's fate. After his death, his most powerful generals would wage war against each other, each claiming to be the strongest and therefore the rightful heir. The vast empire Alexander built through unity would be torn apart by their civil wars. The empire would fracture after his death, torn apart by the very generals who once followed him. Yet parts of his legacy endured. The cities he founded would flourish for centuries. The trade routes he forged would connect east and west for millennia. His name would become synonymous with unstoppable success. But perhaps Alexander's greatest legacy is the warning his life provides. He began as the perfect leader, brilliant, brave, and merciful. He ended, consumed by the very power he wielded so expertly in his youth. 2,000 years later, his story still haunts us, not just because of what he achieved, but because of what he became. His journey from inspiring leader to isolated tyrant carries a timeless warning about power's ability to corrupt even the most promising souls. In the end, Alexander conquered every kingdom except the hardest one to master, himself. What lessons can today's leaders learn from Alexander's transformation? Like Julius Caesar after him, who also fell to the corrupting influence of absolute power, or Cleopatra, whose brilliant mind was eventually clouded by success, Alexander's story warns us about power's ability to transform even the most promising leaders. How do we recognize when success and power begin to corrupt? In an age where corporate and political leaders can amass unprecedented influence, how do we prevent the isolation and ego that destroyed history's greatest figures? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're interested in more stories about power's ability to transform great leaders, check out our episodes on Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into history's most fascinating figures and the timeless lessons they offer. The greatest empire to conquer is the empire of one's own soul. Alexander the Great.